Hey everyone, welcome back to this episode of CIS 275. Honestly, I should make a YouTube channel. I guess this is a YouTube channel. Anyway, today we're going to talk about forms, which is our last major component of HTML, and then we're going to move on to CSS. So if you're at this point, make sure you have read chapter 4. That should not say links. I'll go fix that. Read the chapter on forms. I think it's like actually 6 or 7. But yeah, read that. This video will make a lot more sense. So what is a form? A form is just a way that you collect information from a user on your website. The typical place that you'll see this is in contact forms on websites. You know, you put it in your first name, your email, maybe like a comment. See that a lot. Search fields. There's a very popular search engine that is just a form of one input. Oh man, I just ruined that fun question. Spoiler, it's Google. Yeah, it's just a web form, but it's one input. And there are a lot of different ways that you can actually collect this information. So you can get images, have people upload images, like Instagram when you post a new picture, that's kind of like a form. You're just uploading a text field with your caption and your image. There are a ton though. Actually, I could just open this up. So you can have text, dates, emails, files, passwords, numbers. Here's a range, search field. A lot of these are kind of new. They were part of later versions of HTML. Um, so browser support, I think, can be spotty for some of them. Most of them, I think, should have all of them now. But if for some reason, like, a browser doesn't support an email input, it'll fall back to a text. So it should still work. Oh, here's some on the left. Telephone. So these are all just controls that you can use on your website to collect information. So um, yeah, how do forms work? They fill in the information, the user presses a submit button or the enter key, something like that, and the name of each form control is set to the server along with the value. So if you remember from one of our first lessons, we talked about how like the house analogy for how the languages work together, and you have the back end, which is the pizza shop, and you have to send a request there, and then the pizza shop sends the pizza back. So this is kind of an example of that. So the attribute name or the name of the form control might be first name, and the value associated with it would be Emily, email, and then the actual email value associated with it. So when you send this to the server, it can read that and know how to respond. And a lot of times the response is to add you to a mailing list or send you an email or send the site owner an email, something like that. All right. How do you actually make a form? You have this form element. Everything for a form goes inside it. Forms have an action attribute on them, which says what should happen, what is the file, or I guess you call it like an endpoint. What should handle you submitting the form? So where should all that data be sent to? Oh, URL for the page on the server that will receive the information. There are two methods for submitting, and those also are defined on the form here. Method equals get or method equals post. Get means that when you make the form submission or you submit the form, the values are appended to the URL specified in the action attribute. So in this example here, you have a form. Your action is submit.php. Say you had a first name input and an email input inside this form. When you submit it, it would add the form name and the value like this to the end of the URL. So if I'm on example.com and I submit my form to, let's say you have a handler that's like contact.php. PHP is a server-side language that you can use to handle these form values. It would add it like that. So you don't have to worry too much about this right now. I'm just showing you this is how that would look. If I do a Google search, go here, that's my Gmail. We don't want that. Google.com. And I do cats. And I look up here, you can see that Google.com made a search. This is uh, the query param starts here, so you have whatever, I don't know what any of these are, but you can see that it added some values to the header up here so that the Google search page, this page, knew what to display there. Okay, I'm going down a bunny trail. Back here. The other type is post. So one thing on Get actually, it's better used for short forms, small things that you don't mind the value actually being in the URL, which is unlike post, which is sent what are called using HTTP headers. Again, not something you have to worry about a lot for this class, but you can't see them in the header. So this is a good way to send private data or sensitive data, or doing something that you don't want that information actually public. If you don't specify one, it'll default to Get. Normally good practice to have it in there. Let's see, for the actual inputs, we have text, password, text areas. Passwords are basically just text fields, but they block out the text with those little dots. So if you're typing in a password to something, you'll see that. We have radio buttons, check boxes, drop-down boxes. I'm going to do an example of these in a minute. And you can also have an input type of submit, and you give it a name and a value, and then it actually displays like a button on the page, which you can then click to submit. Or you can actually just use a button. This is an element I don't think we've seen yet because we haven't been doing too much user interaction, but you can create a button on the page and that'll also submit the form. So, and then remember, you should be able to use the form entirely using the keyboard for accessibility. Went over that. So in these examples up here, I guess they do have labels. Yeah, each form field should have a label. And again, this is for screen readers and accessibility concerns where if you just come across an input, say it was just this information, it might be hard to know exactly what should go in here. I mean, you have the name is age, but this doesn't necessarily have to be the label. Like maybe this is age, but the label is age of your dog. So you just need a little bit more context there. So every input should have a label of some sort. And there are two ways to add labels. The first one is to just put the input inside the label like this. This is how I feel like I normally do it, but there are use cases for both. Then you put the content of the label here, and then just have the input next to it. Or you can use the for and the ID attributes to associate a label with an input. So if they're not necessarily going to be near each other, so this one says please select your favorite genre. So you have your input has an ID of rock, a type of radio, so we're making a radio button, and then it has a name and a value. And then here's the label that's associated with this input. So you can see the for is rock and the ID is rock. So if you're going to do it this way, these two have to match. And you can see this is jazz and this is the label for jazz. So this is an example, checkboxes are an example of where you normally have them different or separated like that. You can group related form elements together using field set, and field set has a legend, which just kind of describes what's in the field set. And then we have form validation. So form validation is fairly recent to HTML5. I guess it's been in there a while now, but traditionally it was done using JavaScript, but the browsers added in a good amount of validation, and this is kind of like making sure that all the fields that are required are filled out. If you have some text field that you don't want to be more than like 50 characters, you can set a max length, you can set a min. And then you can set like a pattern, like a specific regular expression for how that data that you're entering should look like. And here's a full example. Excuse me. TBD example. This is the example. Okay, so let's actually try to build a form. So we're going to build this one. So this is what the default styling that your browser applies for a field set here. So this would be the legend, your details. Here we have a name label with an input, an email label with an input. Our next field set is a review of something. So how did you hear about us? This is a drop-down control. Would you visit again? This is a radio button control. Difference between a radio button and a checkbox is a radio button you can only select one. Checkbox you can select multiple. This is just a text field, or you can enter something in there. Here's a checkbox. Sign me up for email updates, and then a button here. So the action I had set there was example.com/review.php, which doesn't actually exist, but you can see it made that GET request and appended the values that I selected into the URL. So that's how you can at least tell that part's working. So, all right. Let me file open. I'm gonna make a new folder. Actually, I think I'm done with all that, so. Okay, all right, so first things first, I'm gonna make my index.html. No weirdness there. And I'm going to skip a few steps. And do the body. And the body. Okay, so just a little bit of boilerplate code there to get us moving faster. So if you remember, the form goes inside a form element. The form has to have, at a minimum, these two attributes. First one being the action, second one being the method. So for this example, we're just going to do a simple form, so we're going to use get. And the action is going to go to http example.com. This doesn't actually exist. Okay. So if we want to, let's go back and look at that example here. If we want to have this first field set here, so well, yeah, they're two field sets, so we'll make each of them. So first one, make your field set. Okay. And then each field set needs a legend. And this we called your details. All right. First thing, we want to add that name field. Let me check it again. All right, name. So to do this, I'm going to start writing my label. And end. And we'll just do name. And then we want to make the actual input where you can put in the name. So inputs they don't have anything that actually is displaying. So you can just do this ending tag like this. It's one of those closing ones like that, where you don't have to do the start and the end. The type, we just need regular old text. And then the name tag, remember the name attribute, or not tag, the attribute name is what actually gets sent to the backend that's processing it. In this case, this review.php. So we'll just call it name. And then we'll do max length of 100. So we don't want their name to be over 100 characters. And let's save that. All right, So there is our first field set. I'm going to do one thing here. Cool. There we go. All right, so now let's add our second label. Starting and ending tag, remember? And then we'll call this one email. I had someone ask about indenting. So just remember to indent if it's a child element of another element. So in this case, the label is starting and ending around this input. So the input's going to be indented over like that. You could, if you wanted to, have it up here too. In this case, I just like to always keep them down like that. So the type, there is an HTML email input type, so I'm going to try to use that. If the browser doesn't support it, again, it'll just display as a text field. The name here is going to be email, and we'll do max length equals 100 again. Cool. So now if I go and refresh that, form inputs like this display inline. So this one you can see they are displayed as block. So eventually you can do this with CSS, but for now you can just add a break, BR right there. Refresh, there we go. Your details, name, looking good. All right, so for the next section, we need another field set, another legend. Legend is your reviews, I think. Your review. And now we can start with our first label. And we want to ask somebody, how did you hear about us? So we're going to make a label the other way now where it's not including the input. So label, how did you hear about us? Label. Okay. And we know that since it's not surrounding the input, we're going to have a for tag, and we'll call this hear about. Okay, and then for our actual input, we want to do a select. So a select tag, or form control, is when you, here, I'll just show you, when you click it and you can look at all the options. So to do that, select, and we'll call this, well, it needs an ID. So now the ID is associated with the for. I'll change this to refer, so it's one word like that. Okay. Select ID equals refer. This label is going to be associated with this because the for and the ID match. And then we also need a name on here so the backend knows what we're talking about. We'll call that refer. And then to actually make the options that are going in the select tag, you just literally use the option tag. Option element. Okay, and first option could be Google. So for the option tag, what's going to actually display in the browser is what's in between here. And then the value associated with this option is going to be what you put here. So if I do a second one here, copy and paste this and change this to friend. Friend and Google are both going to display. These are their values. When you select one, the browser is checking the value of the one you select and assigning that value to this referee here. So when you submit this form, referrer will be the name of the value, and whichever one you selected will be associated with it. So it'll be like refer equals Google or refer equals friend. So the value goes on the option. The name that the value is associated with goes on the select. And we'll do there. These values, normally you just want to be all lowercase. If you've taken another programming language, think of them as the variable names. Just lowercase, simple, no spaces. If this was, I don't know, old advertisement, and you had one that was old, new advertisement, you could do old advertisement. Camel casing like that would work. Okay, and then we'll do one more here. Just do other. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Switch here. Now you can select these, advertisement, friend, Google, whatever. Now we're going to add our next one, which is would you visit again? And we'll do a radio button for this. So we'll do would you actually we're going to wrap these in a paragraph so we get that block styling there. So would you visit again? So checkbox and radio buttons are a little bit different because instead of having really one label for the whole thing, you'll have a label for each individual item. So if I look over here, would you visit again? Technically, that's the question in the form that's being asked, but the label associated with the form control is yes, no, or maybe. So these are your labels. This is just the question that you want to ask there. So I'm going to put it in a paragraph tag here. And then now I can do my first label for this, which would be yes. So I'm going to do my starting and ending tag. So by convention, switch back here for a second. When you have radio buttons and checkboxes like this, the control usually goes on the left with the label to the right. You can see like these up here, it's more likely you'll see the text on the left and the control on the right. But when you have this label associated with each control like that, normally you want it to be on the left. And when you're designing these, you want to make sure that it's obvious which label goes with which input. All right, so first input, we'll do type equals radio. The name is going to be, this is the rating that we're giving, and the value of this first input is yes. So if we break this down here, type radio makes sense. Name is what the variable that you're sending to the backend, rating, and this is the value that is going to be sent if this radio button is selected. Okay, and then the actual label, since we're putting it after the input, is yes. So if I go and refresh this, would you visit again? Yes, there, see I selected it. So we're going to do our second one. Can sometimes just be easy to copy and paste these and change what you need to. Second one is no. So we're going to leave it as a radio. The name we're going to leave as a rating, because remember for radio buttons, you can only select one. And so if you have these names the same, but change the value, that tells the browser that when you select no, unselect yes. So I'm going to save that. Go and refresh. Okay, so if I click no, see yes isn't populated anymore. Click this, no isn't populated anymore. You can only select one. If I change this to something else and refresh, I wonder if you can select both. Yeah, see now you can select both because it thinks it's two completely separate things. So I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to put one in here that is maybe. Change the value, save, refresh. All right, so now I can select between those. So if I were to submit this form right now, the name would be rating and the value would be no. If I click this one, name is still rating, value is now yes. Okay, and then next we're going to do a text area. So label. Say we want to ask somebody if they have any comments on it. Move this up a little bit. Here, I'll zoom in. Comments. And then in here, we need our 4, which we'll just call comments 2. And now that we have our label, that means we need to have an form control associated with it. In this case, we want it to be a text form like this, which is what we call a text area. So I just type text area and make sure you have your ID that's associated with the 4. And it's usually good convention to keep these all lowercase, easy, one-word matches like that. All right, and the name is going to be comments, and I'm going to save that, see how it looks. Oh, something's messed up. Okay, so you see this, how it has field set in there? This is a good troubleshooting way to walk through. I did not write field set in there. So this means that it's thinking this is inside my text area. It thinks that this is the content of my text area, which tells me I forgot to end that. So what the browser was doing was automatically adding this ending tag in there where it thought it should go, which it thought it should go here, which obviously breaks things. So text area is not a like self-closing element. You need to actually close it. And the reason for that is you can put content in here. You can write stuff here, save. You can write it in there. And this is a funny thing too. It's adding all this white space. It's treating, I believe what's happening, it's treating all of this white space here as content that you want it to be added in there. So if I do that, save, refresh, that looks a little more normal there. Say you want this whole input field to be on its own line. I add my BR there. There we go. And then we have a checkbox that we're going to put in finally. Jump back to here. So sometimes it's nice to group these form inputs, like their label, any content, so you can do stuff like put it all in a paragraph. Makes it a little easier to keep together there. All right, so now I'm going to start a new one, and this will be a checkbox. So do our label. We'll do one where it's all inside. And input type equals checkbox. Name equals scribe. Okay, and we're just gonna, for now, end it there. Sign me up for email updates. Okay, so in theory this would work, but the problem is how are you getting the value of whether this input is checked or not? So if I save this and I jump over here, refresh, and I click this button, I'm just going to hit the enter key so it tries to submit the form. Guess it's not going to. I'll just add the last one in here so I can actually do this as an example. I'm going to put an input in here that is type equals, so I'm going to do a button type equals submit, and then the content inside is just what displays in the button. Save that and refresh. So when I submit, it's going to go to this broken link, but you can see all the names up here. So you have name equals, that's empty, so mess something up there, that's empty. Oh, you know what, I just didn't fill it out, so that actually makes a lot of sense. We'll do advertisement. Would you visit again? We'll say maybe. You can write stuff here. Hey there, sign me up for email updates and submit. Okay, so now this is actually filled out. You can see name equals Emily, email equals that. It URL encoded the @ sign to make it safe for URL. Refer equals advertisement, rating equals maybe, comments equals hey, subscribe equals on. Come on, jump back here. I'm actually surprised that on was sent. So, because I would have thought it would be true. So I'm just going to try something quick. What I was trying to make a point of is, oh, I see. Yeah, it will work just like that. That's my bad. There's this attribute value that you can add that's checked, and this is basically like a true or false value for whether the form is checked by default. So if I refresh now, go back, see how it's checked. You can still uncheck it, but it starts out as checked. That's because I put this line here. So ignore all that confusing stuff I said before this. Looks like you don't even need to do this part of it anymore. So I'm going to leave it off because I hate when people automatically sign me up for stuff. Cool. And then the last thing is I just want that button to be on its own line. Buttons are also inline elements. Cool. So now if I hit this button, there we go. It's submitted all of the form stuff. And that's how you make a form. There are a lot of these examples in the book. I actually found some mistakes in the book, like where they had the wrong name or the wrong ID. So if you're copying out of the book, just make sure you're actually going through and making sure it's correct, just because some of those are not. All right, so you'll get a little bit of practice on these forms here through these exercises. And you'll do another table. And then we'll do some additional markup. So I'll just cover some of these real quick. I know this video is getting long, but comments, you may have seen me do these at different places in the section. And this is just a way where you can put code into your site that doesn't display in the browser that gives a little bit of information about the code. So if I go over to here, say, I'm trying to think of a good example. Maybe around this name thing, you want to leave yourself a note that's like going to be helpful for other developers. Like this isn't going to show in the user. I could say, so you start with the left caret, exclamation point, dash dash. You can see automatically in my browser, because I didn't end my comment, put all of this in a comment. So I'm just going to end that quick and then be like, these are the values about your details. So this doesn't really make sense as a comment, but you can at least see how to write it. So left caret, exclamation point, dash dash, and then you end it with dash dash, right facing caret. So if I save that, go back to the browser and refresh, see nothing actually displayed there because it's not visible on the page, but it can be helpful to actually hide parts of the page too. So say you temporarily wanted to not display this email, could do just surround it like that and save, refresh, see the email's gone now. So it's a good tool, very useful when you're developing. And sometimes it's helpful for when you submit a project or something and or somebody else is looking at your code and you just want to have a little bit of extra information there for them to understand. Okay, let's jump back. So every element can have an ID or a class attribute, and these are called global attributes. They can go on any HTML element. The ID has to be unique. So if you remember from our form example, like the first name input had an ID maybe of like first name. No other element on that HTML page can also have an ID of first name then. So it is a unique identifier for that element in that particular page. A class is similar to an ID in that it identifies an element and it's kind of written the same way, but it can be added to multiple elements. So you can think of the ID in a class as a way to target specific pieces of your code. And these are going to be really helpful as we go into CSS because CSS actually styles the HTML elements using IDs and classes. Class attribute should be describing the section. So down here you have these three elements. These are called divs. I'll cover these actually down here, but just think of them as an element that shows a specific part of the page. So say you have an introduction section, you can add an ID of intro. Say you have two other sections below that. I have the section class on both divs. So if I wanted to style all the sections on my page, I could do that. And then you can also have multiple classes. So this one has a class of section and it has a class of last section. This will make more sense when we actually do CSS, but at least you can start looking out for it. Block elements, elements that start on a new line. So like paragraphs, headings, unordered lists, and the div tag. Inline elements are not block, meaning they just stay on the same line. You can add a bunch of them and they won't, go to a new line. And then a div, I've talked about a number of times, but it's just a way to group a bunch of elements on your page that are related together. So it kind of creates a section. So maybe this left-hand side bar here could be a div. This main section could be a div. This right side section over here could be a div. It's just a way to make it easier to target that section of your website. It can make your code look a lot cleaner. It's going to be very important for when we get to the layout section. And it is a block element as well. So here's some code. This doesn't use any divs. You have an H1, two paragraphs, then you have another H1 and a few paragraphs. So it's just kind of like all mashed together here. If you add divs, so now you have your starting div here, your ending div, and then you have this section in here. You can tell that these are all related and these are all related now. Unlike this where it's like kind of muddy, you can't tell what goes with what. A span is exactly like a div except it's an inline element. And it's kind of a last use case scenario when there aren't any ones that are semantically better, but you still need to target a specific element. So if you have a paragraph in it and it has a word that you want to highlight, you could do span class equals highlighted and target that with CSS. So don't worry about the CSS code, but it's just another way to target specific sections of your code. Meta tags, we've talked a lot about this already. Description, you can have, any of these. Minimum, it's usually good to have an author and a description for search engine optimization, but yeah. So those are just some extra ones that are going to be really good to know as we go into CSS. For your exercises, we have the knowledge check, try to get through all of those. And then this semester or this this week, our main thing that we want to do is to have the perfect HTML document. And this means have a comprehensive head section with all of the meta tags that you might use. You want to have a body section. You want to have all your starting and ending tags. Basically, you want it to be perfect, and you don't want any mistakes. You're going to want to run this through the HTML validator. One truly beautiful HTML file. And the reason that we're doing this is because retyping these body tags and these head tags and all this stuff over and over again isn't really necessary going forward, because we're going to want to be focusing on styling. So if you make this perfect HTML document, you can use it for every class, or yeah, every CSS, every assignment going forward, and you just need to add the new code into it and change it as you need to. So that's what you're going to want to be um, focusing on. You definitely want to make sure this is as good as you possibly can, because it's just going to save time for you going forward. So I'm trying to think. Yeah, you want to put some lorem ipsum text in it that you can use and just pass out for content as needed, and then make sure it's all up to spec. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for sticking with me. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you all have a good week. And let me know if you need anything.